Let me tell you something about humans that no xenobiologist, no military strategist, no high-ranking council member of the Vorath Dominion ever bothered to put in their official reports. Humans, when provoked, do not calculate. They do not run probability matrices. They do not consult their superior officers. They do not pause and think, perhaps I should consider the political ramifications of my next action. No, they just do it. And that, friends, is precisely what makes them the most terrifying species in the known galaxy. Not their resilience, not their adaptability, not even their bizarre biological immunity to conditions that would kill a Vorath soldier in minutes. It is the fact that a human, when pushed far enough, stops thinking entirely. This is the story of Commander Greth Valos, 7th-ranked military officer of the Vorath Dominion, decorated veteran of the Siege of Maro Prime, conqueror of 3 orbital stations, and the absolute last being in any known star system who should have grabbed a human girl by the collar in front of her crew. He did it anyway. 10 seconds later, he deeply regretted every choice he had ever made in his life. My name is Dorvak Senn. I am a Vorath. Specifically, I was the communications analyst aboard the Vorath patrol vessel known as the Kulrath Edge, which on the morning in question had just completed a routine inspection of human trade vessel KV Meridian, registration number 7 Alpha Theta 9. Routine, that was the word we used before we boarded. After we boarded, we would use many other words, most of them untranslatable into human language, because they described sensations that humans presumably never feel. Sensations like the sudden awareness that the universe has stopped making sense, and the specific horror of watching your commanding officer make an irreversible mistake in slow motion. We had received intelligence, poorly sourced as it turned out, that the KV Meridian was carrying unlicensed biological cargo. This was Vorath jurisdiction. We had every legal authority to board, inspect, and if necessary, detain. What we did not have was any meaningful briefing on the crew. The KV Meridian carried a crew of 11 humans, a Brenthak engineer named Skos who communicated exclusively through vibrating his chest plates, and one very old Quillari navigator who had been asleep for most of the voyage and did not wake up even when we boarded. Some beings, truly, have mastered peace. I, Dorvak Senn, will never know that peace, because I was standing approximately 4 feet behind Commander Greth Valos when he made contact with the human girl, and I watched the entire thing happen, and I will carry the memory of it to my grave. Her name was Petra Voss. I know this because after the incident I read every personnel file on that ship with the intensity of a being trying to understand how the universe had so dramatically failed him. Petra Voss, 26 standard years old by human reckoning, cargo operations lead, trained in what humans called close-quarters combat, which the Vorath military database categorized as a Level 2 threat. Level 2, as if it was something moderate, as if it was something manageable. The database had clearly been written by someone who had never actually met a human being in a confined corridor. She was not particularly large by human standards. This was the first thing that confused Commander Valos. I suspect the Vorath scale physical threat by size. It is a reasonable system. It works for approximately 93% of species in the known galaxy. Humans are the remaining 7%. Petra Voss stood about 1.7 meters tall. She had short dark hair pulled back from her face, a cargo jacket with what appeared to be a fuel stain on the left shoulder, and she was eating something from a small metal container when we boarded. Something that smelled absolutely terrible. I later learned it was called a protein bar, and that humans consume these willingly, which tells you a great deal about human psychology. She looked up at us when we boarded. She did not look frightened. She did not look surprised. She looked, if anything, mildly inconvenienced. Inspection, she asked the captain, a broad man named Stane who was already moving toward Commander Valos with his hands visible and his expression carefully neutral. Inspection, Captain Stane confirmed. Right, said Petra Voss, and took another bite of her protein bar. Commander Valos was by Vorath standards impressive. He stood 2.4 meters tall, which is tall even for us. He had 4 arms, each one capable of exerting approximately 800 kilograms of force. His rank insignia were polished to a shine that could be seen from across a docking bay. He had the voice of something that lived at the bottom of a very deep ocean, low and resonant, and designed to produce compliance in lesser beings. He was accustomed to lesser beings producing compliance. The inspection began without incident. My colleagues moved through the cargo hold, scanning containers, logging contents, doing the tedious mechanical work of a standard search. Nothing illegal was found in the first 15 minutes. Nothing illegal was found in the next 15 after that. Commander Valos was becoming impatient. Valos impatient was not a comfortable thing to be around. He moved through the corridors of the KV Meridian with the energy of a being who had decided someone on this ship was guilty and was simply waiting for the universe to confirm it. He reached the secondary cargo bay, where Petra Voss had returned to work, shifting containers with a mechanical loader that she operated with the casual ease of someone who had been doing it since before she could legally drink whatever humans drink. Valos watched her for a moment. "This area," he said, in his ocean-bottom voice, "why is it not cleared for inspection access?" Petra Voss did not stop working. "It is cleared. Your guys already came through. I'm just putting cargo back where it goes." "You will stop the work," said Valos, "until I have reviewed the area personally." Petra Voss stopped the loader. She looked at him. She had a very particular way of looking at things, I noticed, a kind of flat, assessing look that reminded me uncomfortably of how Vorath soldiers look at things they are deciding whether or not to neutralize. "Okay," she said. "It's reviewed. Can I get back to work now?" That was not a question. I noticed she did not inflect it as a question. I noticed Commander Valos noticed this too. "You will address me," said Valos, "by rank." "I wasn't told your rank," said Petra Voss. "Commander." "Okay, Commander. Can I get back to work now?" Still not a question. This is the part where I should have said something. This is the part where any being with functional self-preservation instincts would have quietly pulled their commanding officer aside and suggested, gently, that the inspection had found nothing, that the intelligence was likely faulty, and that perhaps we should wrap this up and leave. I did not say anything. I would like to tell you this was because I was following protocol, or because I respected the chain of command, or because some strategic calculation was running in the back of my mind. The truth is, I have come to accept that I was also curious about what was going to happen next. In my defense, I was not expecting what actually happened next. Commander Valos moved toward one of the containers near the far wall, a large orange container marked with standard freight codes. He began to run his scanner across it. Petra Voss took a small step forward. "That one's already been logged. Code 77 Bravo. Your colleague cleared it 20 minutes ago. I will clear it myself." "The seal's tamper reactive," said Petra. "If you break it without the correct authorization code, we lose the cargo bond on this entire shipment. That's 40,000 credits. I'd appreciate it if you contacted whoever handles that on your end before opening it." Reasonable. Completely reasonable. Documented procedure, actually, for Vorath inspectors handling sealed commercial cargo with reactive bonds. Commander Valos knew this. He did not care. He reached for the seal anyway. "Commander," said Captain Stane from the doorway, and his voice had an edge to it now, professional still, but sharp underneath. "We are happy to cooperate with this inspection, but that container was cleared and sealed by your own personnel. Breaking it without authorization is a violation of Trade Treaty Protocol 7-4. I am formally noting that objection for the record." Commander Valos turned to look at Stane. He looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the container. Then he broke the seal. It was a dramatic moment, full of what Vorath military culture would call decisive authority, and what the rest of the galaxy would call a completely unnecessary escalation. Inside the container were approximately 2,000 units of hydroponically grown grain, packaged for colony distribution. Legal, documented, boring. The silence that followed was the specific kind of silence that exists when a very powerful person has just done a very petty thing and everyone in the room is aware of it. Petra Voss looked at the grain. She looked at Commander Valos. She looked at the broken seal, which had triggered a faint alarm chime from the container's bond register. "That's going to cost us 40,000 credits, she said very calmly. "File a complaint with the Dominion Commerce Office," said Valos. And then, because he was apparently committed to making this the worst day of my professional career, he reached out and he grabbed Petra Voss by the collar of her cargo jacket, and he lifted her approximately 2 feet off the ground and he said, in his ocean-bottom voice, with the full weight of his 7 years of military decoration behind it, "And you will learn to show proper deference to Dominion officers when they conduct inspections, or the next thing you file will be a medical report. I will now describe as accurately as I am capable the 10 seconds that followed. Second one, nothing happened. Petra Voss hung in Commander Valos's grip with an expression I can only describe as extremely focused, not frightened, not angry, focused. the way a technician looks at a problem they are about to solve. Second 2 through 4, her right hand moved. I did not entirely see what it did, because it moved with a speed that my visual processing was not prepared for, but it involved Commander Valos's primary left wrist and something that produced a sound like a very large branch snapping in a very quiet forest. Second 5. Commander Valos made a sound I had never heard a Vorath commander make before. It was not a sound that any of his military training had prepared him to make. It was, honestly, a sound I wish I could forget. Second 6. Petra Voss was no longer in the air. She was on the ground. Commander Valos was also in the process of going toward the ground, though not in the voluntary way. Second 7 through 9. A series of events occurred that I have reviewed in my memory approximately 400 times since that day and still cannot fully reconstruct, because they were too fast and too efficient and too completely outside anything the Vorath military database had categorized as a Level 2 threat. Second 10. Commander Greth Valos, 7th-ranked military officer of the Vorath Dominion, decorated veteran of the Siege of Maro Prime, conqueror of 3 orbital stations, was flat on the floor of the secondary cargo bay of the KV Meridian, with Petra Voss standing over him, not breathing particularly hard. She looked down at him for a moment, then she looked up at me. I did not move. I had in the last 10 seconds completely forgotten how to move. "You want to call your people," she said, "and let them know we're going to need that bond reviewed, and someone should probably look at his wrist." She picked up her protein bar from where she had apparently set it down at some point during the previous 10 seconds, and took a bite. "Also," she said, still chewing, "I'm getting that 40,000 back. There is a concept in Vorath military philosophy called Vethrak, which translates, roughly, to the dignity of the superior. It is the idea that a commanding officer's authority is absolute, unquestionable, and visible. It is the foundation upon which Vorath discipline is built. It is the reason our soldiers stand straighter, speak louder, and occupy more space than is strictly necessary in any given room." Commander Greth Valos had just had his Vethrak removed from him by a human woman who was still eating a protein bar. I, Dorvak Senn, communications analyst, stood in that cargo bay and watched my commanding officer being helped off the floor by 2 of my colleagues, and I thought, with the quiet clarity of a being experiencing an epiphany he very much did not ask for, the database was wrong. It was very, very wrong. Level 2 threat. Someone was going to have to answer for that. It was not going to be me. I had done nothing wrong today. I had simply been present, which admittedly felt like enough of a punishment already. Captain Stane had the expression of a man who was trying extremely hard not to smile. He was doing a reasonable job of it. His mouth was doing the correct neutral thing. His eyes, however, were having a completely separate conversation, one that said very clearly, "I have been in this business for 22 years, and I have never seen anything quite like that, and I will be telling this story for the rest of my life." He clasped his hands behind his back and addressed the most senior Vorath officer still capable of standing, which turned out to be a junior lieutenant named Skevath, who looked like he had aged approximately 15 years in the last 30 seconds. "I believe," said Captain Stane, in the perfectly measured tone of a man who had clearly dealt with difficult inspections before, "that this incident will need to be formally documented for all parties. I want it noted that my crew member acted in response to physical contact initiated by Commander Valos, without provocation, in violation of Galactic Trade Charter Article 12, which explicitly prohibits the use of physical coercion against civilian crew members during commercial inspections." Lieutenant Skevath stared at him. "Article 12, Stane repeated, helpfully. "You can look it up. I have a copy if you need one." Skevath looked at me. I looked at the floor. The floor was very interesting. Petra Voss, meanwhile, had returned to her loader. She was moving cargo containers with the same calm efficiency she had displayed before any of this had happened, as though the last 10 minutes were simply a minor interruption, roughly equivalent to a comm signal coming through at an inconvenient time. I watched her for a moment, because I was a communications analyst, and watching things and processing them was, professionally, my entire purpose. She was not tense. She was not running on adrenaline, or whatever the human equivalent of that biological state was. She was just working, loading containers, logging codes, doing her job. I approached her. I want to be clear that I did this voluntarily, and that in doing so, I was exercising a level of personal courage that I feel has never been adequately recognized by anyone who was not there. "Petra Voss," I said. She glanced at me. "Analyst," she said, reading my insignia with the ease of someone who had spent enough time around Vorath to know the rank markings. I wanted to. I paused. I had not entirely planned this conversation. I wanted to say, formally, on behalf of the inspection personnel, that what occurred was not within inspection protocol. She blinked at me. Yeah, I know. Commander Valos acted outside sanctioned procedure. Also know that. I stood there for a moment. You acted very quickly. She looked at me for a second, then went back to the loader. He grabbed me. Yes. So I put him down. Yes. Was there a question in there somewhere? Analyst. There was not, technically, a question. There was something more like a profound personal need to understand how a 1.7-meter human had dismantled a 2.4-meter Vorath commander with 4 functional arms in under 10 seconds, because my entire understanding of threat assessment had just been invalidated, and I was frankly struggling. How, I said, did you do that? Petra Voss looked at me again. There was something in her expression that was not unkind, exactly, but was very direct in the way that many humans were direct, as though they had at some point made a collective decision to skip several conversational steps that other species considered essential. He had bad footing, she said, and he grabbed with his left hand. Most beings lead with their dominant side. His dominant side is his right, so his left grip, even with the extra arms, wasn't as secure as he thought it was. She shrugged. Also, he telegraphed it. He was looking at the container, then he looked at me, then he moved. That's almost a full second of warning. She said this the way a mechanic explains why an engine failed. Matter of fact, not bragging, just explaining the mechanical reality of the situation. A full second, I said. That's a long time. I thought about this. For Vorath, a second was not a long time. A second was what happened between one moment and the next. A second was nothing. A second was barely enough time to register that something was occurring, let alone respond to it. For humans, I said carefully, a second is a long time. Petra Voss looked at me with the expression of someone who is trying to determine if you are being serious. Then she seemed to decide that I was in fact being serious. For humans who train, she said, yeah, a second is enough time to do a lot of things. I filed this information away with the specific energy of a being who intends to include it in a very, very detailed report. The Vorath Dominion, let it be said, does not handle embarrassment gracefully. This is not a personal criticism, it is a structural one. The Dominion is built on the premise that Vorath authority is self-evident, that our military superiority is a fact of the universe rather than a condition that requires constant maintenance. When that premise is challenged, there is no established protocol, because the architects of Vorath military doctrine had not, apparently, considered the possibility that it would need one. Lieutenant Skeveth combed the Kolrath edge. I heard approximately 45 seconds of the conversation, which was enough to understand that whoever was on the other end was not reacting well to the news. Then Skeveth commanded someone above that person. That conversation was shorter and quieter, and had the particular quality of communications in which someone very senior is being told something they had not expected to hear today, and is processing it with the controlled stillness of a being who has learned, through decades of experience, not to visibly react to bad news until they are somewhere private. When Skeveth came back, he looked at Captain Stane. The Dominion, he said, with the specific flatness of someone reading from a script they had just been handed, acknowledges the procedural irregularity of Commander Valos's conduct. A formal review will be initiated. The cargo bond on Container 77 Bravo will be reinstated and compensated. Captain Stane nodded. And the 40,000. Skeveth closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. And the 40,000. With processing fees. Another second of closed eyes. With processing fees. Excellent, said Captain Stane. We appreciate the Dominion's cooperation. He said this with an absolutely straight face. I respected him for it. I genuinely did. Commander Valos was escorted back to the Kolrath edge with his wrist wrapped in a temporary medical seal and his Vethrak in pieces on the floor of a human cargo bay, metaphorically speaking, though I suppose in the most important ways it might as well have been literal. He did not speak during the return crossing. He sat in the transport with the expression of a being reviewing every decision he had made in the past hour and identifying, with growing specificity, exactly where he had gone wrong. I sat across from him. I was also reviewing decisions, though in my case the primary decision I was reviewing was my earlier one not to say anything, and I was becoming more comfortable with it. because I genuinely did not believe that anything I could have said would have redirected Commander Valos from the course he had chosen. Some beings, when they have decided something, and the universe simply has to wait for the consequences to arrive. The consequences had arrived. They had arrived in approximately 10 seconds, wearing a cargo jacket with a fuel stain on the left shoulder. The report I filed that evening was, I think, the most carefully written document of my professional career. I described the inspection. I described the events in the secondary cargo bay. I described Commander Valos's actions and Petra Voss's response with the clinical neutrality of a being who was absolutely not enjoying this, not even slightly, definitely not. Then I added a supplementary section that I titled, Observations Regarding Human Close Quarters Response Capability and the Inadequacy of Current Threat Classification. In this section, I noted that the current Vorath military database classified human physical combat capability as Level 2 on a scale of 1 through 10. I noted that this classification appeared to have been established without adequate field verification. I noted that a Level 2 classification implies a threat level roughly equivalent to that of a Brenthak adolescent or a Quillari in mild distress, and that whatever Petra Voss had done to Commander Valos in 10 seconds was not remotely consistent with this description. I recommended that the classification be reviewed. I recommended that it be reviewed urgently. I recommended that this review be conducted by someone who had actually watched a trained human in action, rather than someone reading theoretical assessments from the comfort of a desk on a Dominion station. Then I recommended, very specifically, that any future Vorath officer planning to physically engage a human crew member in a confined space should perhaps first ask themselves, am I absolutely certain I have adequately assessed this situation? If the answer was anything other than an immediate and confident yes, should then ask themselves a follow-up question, which was, is this actually necessary? I sent the report. I poured myself something warm to drink. I stared at the wall for approximately 20 minutes. 3 days later, I received a communication from the Vorath Intelligence Division, not from Commander Valos's chain of command, from the Intelligence Division specifically, which was unusual because intelligence officers did not typically communicate with communications analysts unless something had caught their attention. The communication was brief. It said, your supplementary report has been noted. You are being temporarily assigned to the Galactic Species Assessment Unit. Report to Station Yenvar within 14 days, bring your notes. I read this twice, then I read it a third time to make sure I had understood correctly. The Galactic Species Assessment Unit was, loosely, the department responsible for maintaining the Vorath Dominion's official documentation on every known species in the galaxy, their capability ratings, their threat classifications, their behavioral profiles. They were, in short, the beings responsible for the database that had listed humans as Level 2. Somebody, somewhere, had read my report and decided that the database needed fixing. Somebody, somewhere, had decided that the best person to help fix it was the communications analyst, who had been standing 4 feet behind Commander Greth Valos when the universe had corrected him. I thought about Petra Voss, standing over a Vorath commander, eating a protein bar, telling me she was getting the 40,000 back. She did get it, by the way, with processing fees. I checked. I arrived at Station Yenvar on the 13th day, 1 day ahead of schedule, because I am a professional and I do things correctly, unlike some commanding officers I could name but will not. The lead analyst of the Galactic Species Assessment Unit was a Vorath named Petra Voss, no relation to Petra, who had spent 30 years cataloguing species data and had the particular energy of someone who had, at some point, accepted that the universe was going to keep surprising her and had made peace with it. She looked at me across her desk. She looked at the file in front of her. She looked at me again. The human, she said. Petra Voss, I said. Level 2. That is what the database says. Petra Voss was quiet for a moment. What would you classify her as? I had thought about this for 3 days. I had reviewed the event in my memory approximately 400 times, as I mentioned. I had consulted everything the Dominion had on human physiology, human combat training, human psychology, and human decision-making under physical threat. I would not classify her as a number, I said. Petra Voss raised what the Vorath have instead of eyebrows. I would classify her, I continued, as a category, specifically the category of, do not grab. Petra Voss looked at me for a long moment, then she did something I had not expected. She made a sound, a short, quiet sound, low in her chest, that was, if I was reading it correctly, and I believe I was, the Vorath equivalent of a laugh, "Sit down, Senn," she said. "We have a lot of entries to revise. I worked with the assessment unit for 8 months. We revised 47 entries related to human threat classification. We rewrote the entire section on human close quarters response. We added a new category to the threat scale, above level 10, which we called level contextual, defined as threat level varies significantly based on whether the subject has been provoked, and provocation thresholds are lower than previously documented. Commander Valos was reviewed by the Military Oversight Board. He was not dismissed because the Dominion does not dismiss decorated veterans easily, but he was reassigned to a desk position at a station so far from any human trade routes that the nearest human was approximately 14 light-years away. "I hope he found peace there. I genuinely do," Petra Voss continued to work the KV Meridian wrote. "I know this because the ship passed through Vorath inspection checkpoints 4 more times over the following year, and each time the inspection was brief, professional, respectful, and completely uninterrupted. Nobody touched her collar. Nobody was going to touch her collar. The word had gone out, the way words go out in military organizations, quietly and efficiently, and with the specific urgency of information that people want to make sure the right people hear. The cargo ops lead on the Meridian, the human, do not. Just that, do not." It was, I thought, a perfectly accurate assessment. Humans, in general, require a revised entry. They are not what the database says they are. They are not level 2 or level 10 or any number on a scale designed by beings who had assessed them from a comfortable distance and filled in the rest with assumptions. They are something else entirely, something that does not scale, something that, when you grab it without thinking, grabs back before you have finished the thought. And if you are Commander Greth Valos, 7th-ranked military officer of the Vorath Dominion, decorated veteran of 3 campaigns, 4 arms and 2.4 meters of Vorath authority, that is the last lesson you learn on your feet. The next one, you learn from the floor.